Evan walked through the city, feeling that he had lost not only his way, but also himself. The streets slowly plunged into darkness, and it seemed that time was flowing backwards, carrying away meanings and habits. He stopped at the old embankment, where the river quietly carried its waters, not asking where it was flowing. At that moment, he did not know that this was where his real journey would begin, a journey into himself, into a strange, quiet world where there was no rush, no demands, no expectations from others. Here, on a cold bench, amid the sound of water and wind, he would hear for the first time what he had been searching for so long: himself. The city fell asleep slowly, as if trying to preserve the last glimmers of the passing day. Its streets gradually sank into twilight. Houses, one after another, extinguished their windows, turning into black squares on the cold surface of old facades. The wind whispered between the rooftops, leaving behind the smell of wet asphalt and the few leaves that had not yet fallen. Sometimes it seemed as if you could hear the city breathing, quietly, steadily, almost humanly. Only by the river, where the air was more humid and cooler, did life continue to flow in barely noticeable streams. The rustle of stones, the footsteps of rare passerby, the soft hum of a distant tram, reminiscent of barely audible breathing. There, on the narrow embankment, stood a bench that was difficult to notice among the others. Not new, not neat, with darkened boards, but as if carrying its own breath, like an old man who has nothing to prove to the world. Evan found her by accident. He was just walking around town aimlessly, trying to escape the emptiness that had settled into his life over the past few months. The emptiness didn't seem physical or visible, but deep, where words lost their power, where familiar actions suddenly became colorless and meaningless. He couldn't remember exactly when everything had become so difficult. Perhaps it happened on the day he lost his job, and with it, his sense of direction. Perhaps it was when he stopped understanding why he got up in the morning. Or maybe it was when he stopped listening to himself, stopped feeling the subtle hints of his soul. Emptiness does not come suddenly. It grows like a shadow, invisible at first, but over time capable of completely engulfing the space around it. Evan stopped at a bench because he was tired. Not physically, his legs could still carry him, but internally, he was exhausted. His fatigue was felt in every breath, in every thought that found no answer. The bench was cold, but it was pleasant. The cold brought back the feeling of a living body, as if reminding him that he was still here, that he was still capable of feeling. He sat down and looked at the water flowing slowly, as if reflecting the course of his own thoughts. The water demanded nothing, was in no hurry, did not strive to appear better than it was. It just flowed, and there was something magically soothing, almost sacred about it. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, slow and steady, like the breath of wind in the leaves. An old man stopped nearby. He was well over 70, but his posture retained a surprising lightness, as if the years had not weighed on him as they had on others. Evan automatically thought that such people carried an inner light that could be felt even if it could not be seen. The old man looked at him, not with curiosity, but with a gentle, calm attentiveness. "You're listening to the river," he said calmly, as if stating a fact rather than asking a question. Evan wanted to say the usual, "No, just relaxing," but realized that the words would sound untrue. He nodded. "A good habit," the old man continued, sitting down next to him. "Water knows more than it seems, more patient than people, wiser than stones. It has no goals, no ambitions, but it achieves what is beyond human power." Evan chuckled softly. "Are you a philosopher?" he asked almost automatically. Everyone who listens to life is a philosopher, but most people don't listen. They only talk, and their words are empty, like an echo in an empty room. They sat in silence for a while. The old man seemed to dissolve into the silence, as if he had been part of this embankment since birth, as if he had never existed separately. "Do you know what's amazing about a river?" he said suddenly. "It only flows forward, not because it wants to, but because that's its nature. And man also flows forward, but he often tries to turn back, to hold on to what is already gone, to clench his fingers around what cannot be held."
"But if everything flows forward," he said slowly, "what do you do if you lose your direction?" The old man smiled. It was a slight, almost imperceptible smile, but it was so warm that it touched his heart. "Direction is not a destination. It is within. You cannot find it outside. You can only create it inside. When you stop fighting the current, when you stop demanding the perfect path from yourself, the direction appears on its own, not as a signpost, but as a feeling." He fell silent. Evan found it difficult to breathe. The old man's words seemed to touch an invisible wound whose existence he had long forgotten. "You're tired," the old man said quietly, "but tiredness is not weakness. It's a sign that you've been walking too long without stopping. People are afraid of stopping, afraid of silence, thinking that life will pass them by. But life is not a train. It is always where you are." Evan felt that every word hit exactly the spot he had long forgotten existed. "You talk as if you know me," he exhaled. "I don't know you," said the old man, "but I know people, and people live with the same pain. They just call it different names." He looked at the river. "The most insidious thought is that you need to change your life drastically. No one is obligated to live that way. No one is obligated to be different tomorrow. Sometimes all it takes is to be a little quieter today than yesterday, a little more attentive, a little more honest with yourself. Small steps seem insignificant, but they are what create momentum that cannot be stopped." Evan listened, and something shifted inside him, like a tile in a mosaic that suddenly found its place. The old man got up, leaning on his cane. "Come here when it gets dark," he said. "The river doesn't speak, but it knows how to listen. Sometimes that's the most important thing." He left as quietly as he had appeared. Evan sat on the bench for a long time, listening to the water until the noise inside him grew quieter. When he got up, he felt not a decision, not inspiration, but a small, unusually calm movement inside, as if his soul had taken a step that his body had not yet realized. He began to visit the river often, sometimes early in the morning, when the city was just waking up, when the air was clear and the smell of wet grass and asphalt mingled with the faint scent of fog. Sometimes late at night, when the streetlights cast shimmering golden paths on the water. Sometimes he watched the ducks glide leisurely across the water, the leaves that had fallen from the trees swaying on the surface, and the moon reflecting in the silvery waves. The old man didn't always show up.
Sometimes they sat together in complete silence. Sometimes they talked about time, about fears, about how a person becomes themselves. After each conversation, Evan left a little different. Not better, not stronger, but more honest. Gradually, he began to make small changes. Nothing flashy or radical. He stopped berating himself for what he hadn't managed to do. He began to give himself 5 minutes of silence in the morning. He began to listen to his thoughts instead of running away from them. He stopped looking at life as a marathon where you have to run faster than everyone else. He began to perceive time differently, as something alive, not a tool of pressure. What had previously seemed like chaos gradually turned into a path, not straight, not confident, but real. Weeks and months passed. Evan changed as quietly as a river flows. He stopped searching for meaning and began to see it in small things. He stopped waiting for change and began to notice it in things that had previously seemed unimportant. In the morning air, in the feelings that came during a walk, in how different his own thoughts sounded, in how softly the trees rustled in the park, in how the reflection of the streetlights turned the water into a shimmering canvas. One day, he came to the embankment and saw an empty bench. The old man was gone. He was gone the following days too. A month passed, then another. Evan realized he would never see him again. But he did not feel a sense of loss. He felt gratitude, so deep that it was as if time itself had placed it in his hands. That night, he sat on the bench for a long time. The moon reflected in the water, turning the river into a silver ribbon. The sound of gentle waves, the faint cry of an owl, and the light breath of the wind mingled with the breath of the city, and Evan felt that he was finally hearing not the river, but himself. He didn't know where his life would take him, but for the first time in many years, he wasn't trying to figure it out. He just sat there in silence, knowing that the journey had already begun. Quietly, calmly, almost imperceptibly, and that he didn't need to search for it. He just needed to live. The river flowed forward without asking where, and so did the man. And that was enough.